and welcome to the Dharma Journey podcast. Dr. Eva Brown, she is a most amazing human, a couples therapist and trauma-informed therapist as well. And today we're going to be talking about her main topics, which are sex, intimacy, and communication in relationships. Now, this has been a big one in my life in terms of my own relationships, like navigating, how we can become more open, authentic in our relationships so we can have more intimacy. And I think we all can relate to that, especially with everything going on in the world right now. It's a lot of stress on our work and our children, on our relationships. So I'm super excited to have you on so I can learn about it as well, and we can share with the listeners, what you do and how you help couples and individuals work through their limitations so they can show up in their work, in their relationships, in life, more capable human beings, and they can really thrive in all areas. So welcome, Eva. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much, Bree. It's always a pleasure to be in your energy and also talk about topics that I think are really relevant for couples in 2020, especially. COVID-19, I think, took a lot of couples by surprise, people in general. And now the children are going back to school. And, like you mentioned, there's so many ups and downs and things like that I think couples are trying to figure out, how do we navigate this? It's hard enough to navigate it normally, but now we have some more obstacles that are coming up. So it'll be fun to, dive deep into these things and also just be vulnerable as well about our own challenges during COVID-19, really. I've certainly had ups and downs and, moments where I've been crying on the floor, and moments where I feel like there's so many silver linings, truly, that has come from this situation, which we can talk about too, if it comes up,
Yeah, just saying that rings a bell. I think either majority of people I know have either broken up in COVID or they're full pregnant. And I know in my own relationship, my partner and I, we had quite a long break, about a 3-month break. And I think we did an interview on Instagram during that period, and it was, I had no idea that I would, we would get back together. And I'm so grateful that we have reunited and can actually grow in a bit more of a stable way now. But I know for sure, living in Bali and the stress on the community here in terms of not having the hustle and bustle of Canggu people, it's normally a lot more vibrant and busy, and a lot of the time we were not specifically in lockdown, but we were definitely challenged living under one roof, working from home, constantly being in each other's environment, nonstop, 24/7, and it does affect the intimacy, because you become your housemates almost, and you forget that you're in a relationship. And I think what happened in our relationship, speaking from my own perspective, is we failed at a little bit of communication. We were scared to speak our truth, what was going on for us, and obviously business wise, and affecting our the things that were affecting us in terms of being in this lockdown and everything going on around us, and not really knowing, what the future may hold. I think it is a little bit scary, and it puts us into that.
It is,
mode, that fear of
certainty.
Yeah. So what, the couples that you've been going through, obviously therapy and stuff like that, what kind of challenges have they been facing that you've been looking into in the last couple of months? I'd love to know.
I think it's a good question, and I think it's relevant right now. It's interesting because it's the same type of issues, okay? Whether it be emotional intimacy or communication or sacred sexuality or escalated arguments, things like that, or sexual blocks or intimacy blocks or anxiety, depression, you know what I'm saying? The only difference is there's just so much more on their plate now, and so I'm finding that a lot of couples are needing more support, so my practice right now, and my practice has always been very busy, but it's doubled since COVID-19. because people are needing the get resourced, just to be able to talk and get things off their chest. Never the mind creating change in their relationship, if that makes sense. They're looking for that support to be able to think about, okay, how do I manage my kids? How do I manage dinner? How do I manage all the things that are happening in my life, on top of learning how to communicate? Because communication is a mastery. In a relationship, you have to learn how to do it in an intimate way, so you can still you want to have sex and you want to connect later, as opposed to how a lot of couples are communicating, which is through attacking and complaining and blaming and things like that. And a lot of the couples that I work with don't even realize how they're coming across or how they're attacking their partners. In just regular communication, like sometimes you could say something like, just give everyone an example, you always, or you never, that type of vernacular, right? Or anything with a you, really, at the beginning is the immediate sign of an attack, and your partner's gonna get on the defensive. And sometimes it's just such a normal way to communicate that people don't even realize it, And so that's just one example of a communication glitch, which is kind of a normal, it's a pop psychology communication glitch. But the dilemma is not only learning it, but applying it when you're upset, applying it when you're frustrated, learning to take a time out or do higher trigger management. And a lot of the couples that I've been working with are highly triggered right now, either because their finances have changed, even though a lot of my clients are well off and they're entrepreneurs and stuff like that, or their businesses have been affected because it was like specifically affected by COVID, like the airlines or the travel industry or something like that. And then the couples that I work with that actually have children, their children started about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. I think they're all pulling their hair out of their head, and the kids are bored too, so it's like, what do we do with the children? It's really it's just so much stuff. It's the normal stuff, but maximized by 10.
It's funny you say that, because I just noted myself in the other day, like my partner and we were taking the dogs for a walk, and something happened with the dog. I think someone praised the dogs for being well behaved or something like that, or doing poor. I can't remember exactly. And I was like, yeah, that's because I brought them up on my own. And as soon as I said that, I've said it a couple of times now, because the last couple of months when my partner and I split up, I took the dog, and now we have two. Every time we break up, we get a new dog. It's like the thing in our relationship. But anyway, and my partner George, he said, "Oh my God, you know who I heard when you said that, and you've said it a couple of times now." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Your mom." And I was like, "Oh my God," because my mom's story, love her to bits, but my mom's story is, single mom of 3, brought the kids up on her own, which she did an amazing job. But it's like the stories and the narratives that we have, like I say, from our own trauma, from our own background, and they're so conditioned in our brain. Like, and now when he mentioned that, I'm like, oh my God, I sound like my mom. Like, poor me, like bringing up children on my own, even though that, the children, that's their birthright to be brought up by parents. And I noticed that how I was doing it with the dogs. I'm like, well, imagine when I have kids, I'm going to do the exact same to my kids. And then they're going to feel like, oh, it's a chore to bring me up, kind of thing, or it's a hassle. So that really resonated with me. And I was like, wow, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, the let's talk about that for a minute, because I think that's really relevant. I don't know that a lot of people realize how relevant that what you just said actually is when it comes to couples dynamics. Because, for example, the first thing that I do when I work with a couple, Bree, is I talk to them about where they were raised, how their family system was managed, what's their relationship with money, finances, conflict. Did they yell in the house? Did they, give a silent treatment in the house, right? How were you punished? All those types of questions are the things that I talk about in the first session or so. And I ask both couples also, both people in the couple, what their relationship was like with all of their siblings, if they have any, their mother, their father, their grandparents. I get the whole family system in a genogram. And the reason why I do that is because the patterns that you're talking about right there come out in a subconscious way. It's almost like a trance state, and you don't realize because you've been conditioned. And it's almost like Pavlov's dogs, you know, I mean, I hate to relate humans to Pavlov's dogs, but it's kind of the truth, right? We've been conditioned. And I think I talked about this in our Instagram live that we did, where the brain doesn't develop till 25. So most of the stuff that we learn below the age of 25, AKA when we're with our families, right, is actually stored in the subconscious brain. Yeah. And those things are like hardwired. And if you don't bring them to the surface, you won't notice them. Like, for example, if your partner didn't say something to you, that might have gone subconscious for you. And this is the reason why I believe, I'm also partial, couples therapy or couples work is so essential all throughout the stages of your entire relationship, because change happens on a yearly, if not daily basis. You know, you're talking about life transitions, work, children, how to raise them. You know, couples have so many roles these days that their heads are spinning, you know? And so it's so important to get that resource and that communication really, really down, especially when it comes to that multi-generational, what you just talked about, that multi-generational pattern, because it is a bitch. It will literally nip you in the bud and it will take over your life, really, without even realizing it, until you have a couples therapist in front of you that's like, hey, this is happening. And then they're like, oh, wow, I didn't even see it, you know? And then of course, once you see it, you can't unsee it anymore.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I believe out of the three areas that you work on the most, sex, intimacy, communication, maybe I'm wrong, but from my own understanding, communication, I think, is the top one. And that kind of has a ripple effect into the others. Like if you can't communicate, you're going to fail to connect intimately and have, you know, beautiful sex, which is obviously why we're with a couple, you know, otherwise we'd just be great friends, you know. But I mean, for me, it's like, I've noticed like the other day I got triggered because something happened with my partner and it made me feel unsafe. And it wasn't him making me feel unsafe. It was my own trauma response, my own patterns of feeling unsafe. And that's something that he did triggered that response. And, you know, I had this like inside of me, I'm like, should I tell him I feel unsafe, or is that going to cause an argument? And I was like kind of going through the motions in my head of what the scenario may be. And normally I wouldn't have this conscious awareness to do it. Anyway, I chose to say, look, my love, this scenario makes me feel a bit unsafe. And I do trust you, that it's not doubting that, but I just feel a little bit triggered and unsafe in this. And he literally said, Briar, you are safe, you know, and he reassured my neediness of feeling safe. And that was something in the moment that really, really helped me. And now I've completely let it go. Like the thing that was triggering me was completely put to bed. So yeah, usually I wouldn't have voiced that, and I would have carried on, and then the narrative in my head would have grown. I would have made all of these made up belief stories in my head that probably are definitely not true. And then later on, I would have seen him, he would have done something, and I would just reacted out of anger, not from that moment, but from something, you know, from this situation where I didn't voice my fears.
Absolutely.
Voice my feeling of not feeling safe. Do you see that a lot in, because I said the 3 pillars of communication. Would you say communication's like the pinnacle, or?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, honestly. You know what the pinnacle is vulnerability. The pinnacle is vulnerability. Because you can't have intimate communication without vulnerability. You can't have sacred sexuality without vulnerability. And you can't have emotional intimacy without vulnerability. People know how to communicate. They just don't know how to be vulnerable.
I hope.
And then the next question is, how do you be vulnerable when you are vulnerable? Because there is a way to do it and a way not to do it, right? And again, it's like these societal norms, right? The government system, the prison system, the education system, almost every single system culturally worldwide comes from a place of right and wrong, right? And relationships, as you know, don't live in that space. You know, we try to live in that space, but relationships and intimacy and sex don't belong in that space. And when people and couples start to realize that the right or wrong, or what I call the content style arguing, or the political platform arguing, where one person says what they think and the other person says what they think, meanwhile, there's a whole slew of emotions going on underneath this content of, well, no, that's not what you said. You said it this way. No, that's not what you said. You said it this way, and then you rolled your eyes and blah, blah, blah. And here we go with the narrative. And the reason why that happens is that there's a cultural and societal issue with the way that we communicate. We communicate in debate rather than dialogue. And I think that when couples realize that you can't debate in a partnership, and what really needs to come is the dialogue, which is a two-person conversation rather than one upping each other in a power struggle. And most couples are in a power struggle and they don't realize it, because it's very hard to actually see a power struggle within all the content layers. But, you know, when you have a trained eye, you can pinpoint it almost immediately in the way that they interact with each other, their behaviors, you know, how are they turning towards each other? Are they turned away? You know, so when I work with my couples, I'm always looking at their body language. You know, I'm looking at how they speak to each other, how much we-ness and do they have in their coupledom. If there's a lot of I, that's usually a little bit of an issue. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes we don't even realize our own ego patterns. And so dialing it back to the question that you asked, I think that couples have two choices. There's probably 100 of them, but in my mind, there's two. Which is that you can either war yourself and your partner, or you can heal yourself and thereby heal your partner. And in doing that, you have a choice. You have a choice. Every single thing that you do in your relationship is a choice. If you're living in an intentional way, but most of us are living in a subconscious relationship that's just kind of going through the motions. And the couples that are in those relationships, the survival type of relationship, I've definitely been in those types of relationships before, myself personally. They don't even realize that they are surviving because they don't know what they don't know, right? It's like kind of that, like, remember that little box, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and then you know what you know, all that stuff, you know. And it's so true, right? I mean, it's such a silly thing because you see it in all the trainings and everything, you know. But when my couples finally work with me and they start to figure out what their patterns are, and they figure out, more importantly, what are my partner's trauma patterns? Because what you're talking about, Bree, when you asked your beloved, you know, and you asked yourself, should I tell him that I'm unsafe? That is a trauma response. And if couples can learn how to hold space, right, for your partner when they're in a trauma response, like your partner did for you, which he did great, you know, and that's exactly what you want to do, right? Which is, I'm here for you. Let me reassure you that you are completely safe and that I love you, right? And the thing is that our triggers have nothing to do with our beloveds. Honestly, the truth is, we are just projecting our triggers onto our beloveds. And when we're not paying attention, and this is the thing that you also talked about, when we're not paying attention to our own emotions, they come out in anger, in rage. And that's when arguments happen. Arguments happen when you neglect to say or be vulnerable about how you actually feel, or a trigger that's coming up for you that feels very real in the moment, even though it might not be real at all. in the context of it's actually happening. It's just real for you emotionally, which is the trauma response.
Yeah. And how do people start to, I mean, I've been doing like the last 3 years, I've been doing so much self-work on myself. And obviously I think the biggest thing that's helped me on my healing journey, like I said, it's always never ending, the healing journey. We think that we are like nearly there and then something will happen and we're like, oh, right back to the start. And I think the biggest healing for me is being in a relationship with a man that is definitely more conscious than I have ever had before. And I think it's, we meet people where we're at, and the previous relationships I've had, like you said, ignorance is bliss. We were just surviving, and I think when we don't know how a beautiful, sacred partnership can be, and that's something that came up actually in my plant-based medicine journey a couple of weeks ago, and that was the turning point that Jordan and I made me realize that I wanted to do this thing called life with him, and he is the partner I meant to be with, to look at myself and heal myself and grow together. And I saw in my journey about sacred partnership and how that is a pathway to the divine or to source or to really healing all of ourselves and becoming one, when two become one. And sacred partnership and that companionship, I think we all crave so deeply. We crave that intimate connection, but because of our own patterns, our conditions, our trauma, I wrote a post yesterday, the one thing that we fear the most will end up coming true. And my fear is being left alone and being not in a relationship. Like my mom, she's 55 and she hasn't got a relationship, and I know she craves one, and that is such a big fear for me, because I see my mom and how much she struggles with not having a beautiful sacred partnership. So for me it's like a really big wound, and I'm like, I don't want to end up like that. But I know, because of my own patterns and the way that I operate in relationships, I end up pushing my partner away, because I couldn't in the past. I'm getting better now, but I couldn't communicate, and I couldn't even see my own limitations and how I was projecting my own shit onto them, basically. So how, for people that maybe are in that kind of process of becoming more self-aware, what would be maybe a little tip that they can do when they feel that trigger arise and they can't quite pinpoint why it's happening? When you get a trigger and you're like, okay, you think, oh, that he's triggering me, I feel triggered, but at that point you haven't got the self-awareness just yet to relate it back to a specific moment in time or a childhood wound. But maybe afterwards you can be like, okay, that's when I didn't get my needs met and I didn't feel heard, and in that moment I felt like I couldn't express myself. But for some people, they might have that awareness but not yet. What would be a great tip for them to do to pause and not act upon their trauma response, basically?
So here's the short answer, and then we'll go into a little bit of a longer understanding. Okay, so the short answer is that every single trigger that we have is our own, that our partner can never make us feel any way in particular at all. Even how we interact with them and how we feel around them is our responsibility. It's our reflection, So what I mean by that is, if you feel a trigger coming up, it's your trigger, number one. And the responsibility is to communicate what that trigger is. If you don't know what the trigger is, then you need to do a little bit of what's called trigger mapping. And that's something that I do with my couples often. So when I go into the multi-generational family stuff, what I'm really doing is I'm mapping out triggers. And when I can figure out together what's her triggers, what's his triggers, or if it's a lesbian or a gay couple, and I see same-sex couples as well, what's this person's trigger and what's that person's trigger? And usually people have anywhere between 6 to 10 triggers. And, there's usually a couple heavy ones, right? So I can speak for myself. Mine is not feeling heard. Yeah. I grew up in an Italian, Jewish, Irish family system. And I talk about this a lot, and my couples always laugh at me every time I talk about it. They get a kick out of it. But it's, I really didn't feel heard. And it's not because my parents weren't listening. It's because the culture in and of itself, they kind of like talk over each other, And so I didn't realize that I had this trigger until I started doing deeper work during my master's program, because they basically break you down and build you back up, And I was like, oh, okay. So I have a not feeling heard trigger. Fantastic, But I didn't know I had that trigger. So in all of my previous relationships, how that trigger would normally come up is, you're not listening to me. You never understand where I'm coming from, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, all of my ex-boyfriends, However, now it's, with my husband, because we live in a conscious, sacred partnership, and we weren't always a conscious, sacred partnership. We grew into it. And that's another question that a lot of people ask me. Do you grow together, or do you grow individually and then get together? My question is, you're going to grow together no matter what, because you have to grow in relationship to yourself, because we have a relationship with ourselves, and then we have to grow in relationship to our partners, right? So it doesn't matter how much growth work you do. When you get into a relationship, all those triggers you thought you worked on are going to come right back up, and they're going to stare you in the face, and you're going to have to figure out, what do I do now with them? And so what I do with couples is I help them figure out how to navigate triggers. And I find that that's actually one of the most important pieces for sacred partners to develop, which is, hence the name of our rebrand, Sacred Partners. I always thought to myself, what am I really doing with couples? Like, what is it that we're creating here, And that name popped up. We were in the pool one night, my husband and I were talking, and we wanted it to be inclusive too, because we wanted it to be partners, not just, not just the typical heterosexual relationship, And so, it's getting back to growing together. And you're not going to be able to really get into sacred partnership the way you want unless you know what your triggers are, unless you know how to communicate them, and unless you know how to not project them and communicate them from a place of, this is an example of how it would go in my house. So if I'm feeling my trigger of not feeling heard coming up, like I'm shopping for furniture with my husband, I have been for the past 2 weeks, and he's like, well, I really like this, and I really like this. Well, we're going back and forth about the furniture in the house, and I was like, I just felt this trigger come up in the middle of the furniture store, So I just turned to my husband and I said, babe, and he always laughs at me every time I say that, because he knows it's coming, I'm like, I feel like my trigger of not feeling heard is coming up right now. And it would really make a difference if you could just do a little active listening, because my body is flooding. I'm feeling like my face is getting hot. And I usually tell him like a description of like what my body feels like. And he just goes right into his divine masculine and gives me a big hug and says, honey, at the end of the day, I don't care what furniture we buy, as long as you're happy, And we started getting into like a quick little conversation in the middle of the furniture store. And, a lot of people would hear that and think, yeah, right, that's a fucking fantasy. You know what I mean? Like, you're in the middle of a furniture store. Most couples are arguing and getting irritated with each other. You know what I mean? Whatever, Dr. Eva, I don't believe it, And a lot of my couples don't until they get into it themselves and they start to see the value of the work. And Paul and I have done work. We've cried together. We've fought together. We have learned together. We've grown together. We've gotten through sexual blocks together, intimacy blocks together. We have had several ego deaths in our relationship over the years. And the thing is, and we continue to do it. We continue to do it over and over and over again. When we think that we have learned and we're awesome, oh my gosh, here's another lesson, And then so Paul and I have learned to live with the grace and surrender to our lessons when they come up, and try to continue to advance the way that we manage our emotions as human beings. Because the truth is it's hard. We're going against evolution. We're only using 3 to 4% of our conscious mind. The rest is subconscious and emotional and fight or flight.
Yeah, like I think I a lot of the work I do with my clients is like bringing them out of that sympathetic nervous system back to your parasympathetic nervous system. And I know it's been a big one for me in my relationship. It's like my boyfriend, he's like, babes, when you have coffee, you go into your sympathetic survival, and it's like my trauma response is like my self-fulfilling self-fulfilling prophecy is, that I'm going to be alone like my mom. That is like my self-fulfilling I can't bloody say it. Fulfilling.
It's fulfilling,
Fulfilling. Okay. So, and what happens is, like, I have a coffee, for example, I get activated and I'm so much more reactive, and then I will get triggered more easily. So consciously I'm like, okay, I'm actually gonna break this habit of being yourself, break the habit of having a coffee, every day, and maybe just have one when I'm not seeing my partner. But honestly, it's been such a, like, the last couple of months we've been in more of a parasympathetic state. He's given up coffee too, so he's like, well, I'm going to give up coffee so it doesn't trigger you wanting it. And we've really actually navigated it, the new, the ego death of our old relationship, which I love that, the ego block and the death, because we definitely had to go through that. And now, like, consciously, like, okay, we know a trigger in our relationship is being activated in our sympathetic nervous system. So how do we bring ourselves back into a parasympathetic state? And it's really hard to argue when you're calm. When you've done your meditation, you're in a calm state, you don't get triggered as easily. Do you notice that with your couples?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for myself on that. I mean, I can speak for myself on that, of course, for my couples. Actually recently, Paul and I just bought a house. We're like super stoked. We bought our dream house up in like Port St. Lucie. I'm so excited. And it was actually really hard because we went through the lending process, and we went through all the financing, and COVID-19 put more restrictions on the lending process and stuff, which a lot of couples are going through right now when they're trying to buy homes and stuff. And it was actually super, super stressful. And we were going up and down, and we were riding the wave of that whole experience, because the lender's like, we need this from you now. Okay, we need this from you now. It's kind of like a constant, nagging, on your tail skirts in the midst of also running your business. And, at first it was really cool, but then we ran into a little bit of a glitch, and I felt myself just get super disappointed. I was just like, wow, like, I can't believe this is happening right now. And I went into a trauma response that I hadn't had in years, Bree. And I really felt like almost like a full-on rage, coming through. I was so angry, and I had, like, trauma patterns and things like that I had, growing up. And I had to take a moment to, like, really collect myself. And these types of things happen in life for couples more often than just a couple times a year or every other year, and you're speaking to the reactive system of something that we have unresolved trauma, or unresolved feelings, or unresolved realities that sometimes we pack so far in our subconscious mind that all of a sudden, just boom, out of nowhere, it just pops up in your face. And you're like, wow, I haven't seen you in a long time. And when that happens, like we've been talking about, we have to learn how to do it. But the thing is that it's going to happen. It's going to happen. When you were talking about the coffee and not drinking it, and I think that's a great habit to establish, especially if you notice you have a reactivity to it. But the thing is that most people have a reactivity to caffeine, and they don't realize it. Most people have stress, and they don't realize it. Most people have anxiety, and they don't realize it. Most people have depression, and they don't realize it. And so it's like we just kind of go into these trance states. But when you get into sacred partnership, or you become a sacred, you know, divine human being, where you're constantly being in you're in your conscious mind as often as you can, because it's impossible for a human being to be conscious all the time. We're not Spock from Star Trek, okay? It's just not going to happen, all right? So the expectation of life being perfect all the time, just reduce your expectations about it and learn how to navigate the waves is a better way to go about it. And I think pop psychology, you know, talks about healed, you know, healing the trauma. And I don't like to say that. I think if you learn how to manage your relationship with trauma and shift your relationship with it, then you can have a very different relationship with it, and you can heal it. But it's over time, and it's with every single moment that it comes up, you nurture that trauma, you nurture that trigger, you turn to your partner, you're vulnerable with your trigger, and then, you know, you heal a little bit more. But it's not like you're completely healed, except for the fact that maybe you might see that trigger come up less and less and less.
Yeah.
And that can happen.
You notice it more. You notice it in that moment, instead of acting because of, you know, impulse in your fight or flight. You actually have that conscious awareness to be like, okay, I see this, it's not serving me. How can I let it go without acting upon it? And I think that's such a beautiful thing to do, but it's definitely work. It's definitely takes time and consistent effort. And I think we often think, oh, we can just do like a course or watch something, and we think that consciously, oh yeah, I can watch this thing, a podcast, and I think, oh, I'm healed now because I know that this is happening. But like you said, you really have to go into the trigger mapping and do the deep dive that a lot of people don't want to do because they're afraid of seeing what's going to come up, or they feel like, I think a lot of people, I know for me, I didn't even know that I had these certain triggers of is your doggy, of not feeling heard, not feeling seen, of having this, like, you know, when I was a little kid, I was super angry. Like I had a lot of anger, and I see that, you know, it's come up in my relationship. Sometimes I've had this like burst of anger come up, and I've not hit, but like have taps my partner like quite hard, you know, like, you know, in a response. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, I see that, like the little girl inside of me that wants to be heard and seen, and it hasn't been seen and heard, and that frustration, anger. And I think when you've been in maybe a childhood that had kind of physical abuse in terms of hitting and grabbing and that kind of stuff, it definitely, you learn that coping mechanism. So that's something that I've definitely noticed when I feel angry.
Yeah, it's actually really normal, you know. I mean, full on, you know, violence is different than what you're talking about, you know. But it's really normal for couples, you know, to tap their partners or give them a punch in their, you know, shoulder. I've seen it happen before, you know, especially if you get angry enough, you know, or it's, you know, slap your partner across the face or something, you know what I mean? You see in the movies all the time. But it's really, you know, anger is interesting. Anger is interesting because I like to talk about it. Anger is like a check engine light going off in your car. If you don't address it, if you don't address the check engine light going off in your car is going to break down. And the thing is that we've been acculturated to believe that anger is a bad thing. But anger is actually a gift. As long as you pay attention to it, and as long as you dial in the relationship that you have with anger, and you channel it in a way that's healthy. And there are healthy ways to work through your anger, you know, like putting on music and raging to music, or going out for a run, or going to the beach and just running along the beach as fast as you can. Or maybe it's like doing jumping jacks or something like that. If you feel anger, you know, you have to learn how to embody that and learn how to utilize that. You can have also great sex, you know, with anger too, you know, so it's one of those things that you have to be dialed into, because if you don't acknowledge that you're an angry person and that you have rage, which almost every single person does, by the way, if you believe that you don't have any rage or you don't have any anger, think again. That stuff will creep up on you because it comes out when you're triggered. You know, that's how you know you have rage. That's how you know you have pent up shit that you haven't dealt with yet. And when you get to deal with that, when you get to deal with it, because otherwise it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, people always say to me, you know, I don't want to be like my mom. I don't want to be like my dad, Dr. Eva. And I'm like, yeah, well, neither do I. You know, I mean, I love my parents, and there's some valuable things about them that I definitely want to take after, but there's some things that I might want to change up. Right. And so you have to know the good and the bad, and you have to know it so intimately so you're not blocked by it. You know, it's not enough to say, I don't want to be like it, and I'm never going to be like it, and blah, 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 pointing the finger and blame. You actually have to really understand the psychology of your parent. Why were they there in the first place? How did they get there? What kind of survival mechanisms were they using? All of those deep conversations that you would have with a coach or a therapist. So you can figure out, okay, those are my blind spots, and those are the things that I need to work on dialing in, because otherwise it creeps up on you. And then you're like, oh, well, that's not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I feel that. I just was distracted because I did something with my toe and it sounded like a fart, and I was like, I hope no one thinks I farted.
I didn't hear anything.
I would love as well, maybe before we, wrap it up, I would love to know a bit about, I think a lot of couples right now, and I know in my own relationship before we, reunited, we were having a lot of intimacy issues and sexual blocks, and the polarity between the masculine and feminine was a little bit out of balance. Could you explain how maybe you can notice that in a relationship, and how we can, hopefully fine tune it so we can come back into a state of love, joy, gratitude, inspiration in our relationship, so we can thrive and really join together as a sacred partnership and have that beautiful connection and intimacy, which is why we're in a relationship, is to intimately connect on a heart-to-heart level, because we are, sensual sexual beings, and we all crave to have many orgasms and have that feeling of, that animalistic, tendencies that we all do. But I think often or not, when life gets busy, that's the last thing that we end up focusing on, even though it's probably the most nourishing in the relationship, is to help us heal, is through our sexual energy. It's very powerful.
It is. Yeah. Well, I could probably talk about that topic for literally 2 hours, because it's so nuanced. It's so nuanced, but I can give you a couple of ideas. Sacred sexuality and building the polarity in the relationship actually starts in the morning, first thing when you wake up, and it goes all the way till the evening, and there's so many nuanced layers to it that you almost have to be ridiculously annoying at first, where you're kind of like, what would spending time during the day at this time of the day do with my beloved? And how does what is my beloved like when I'm in my feminine? And what is my beloved like when I'm in my masculine, right? And just those two questions are actually really good questions to ask your partner. And if they don't know what that means, you can do more research on it. But the feminine is usually more of a vulnerable, flowing, very stationary, still. Really, it's almost like thinking about like holding a baby, it's very maternal. And masculine is like sun energy, and it's like powerful, and it has a very calm but penetrating energy, and energy is something to play with. It's not just like the metaphor of the masculine and feminine, because it's just a metaphor to understand the concept, but it really is like an energetic feeling that the man and the woman, depending on if you're in a same-sex or heterosexual relationship, has to actually embody within themselves. And so a lot of sacred sexuality and building polarity starts with yourself too. Like, what's your relationship with your own sexuality? That's a big question, that right there. I mean, answer that question and you'll come to a lot of answers. Myself, I had to do a lot of thinking about that. And the funny thing is that I was a passion parties consultant in my 20s, and I sold lubricant and sex toys, and I taught women how to have sex in the bedroom and how to, that's what I did for like 10 years. And I taught sexual education, and It was great. I had a great time. But when I got married and I started my master's and I was getting into my PhD, I noticed I was so blocked sexually. Not that, and I love sex. It's not that. When we finally do it, I'm like, woo, it's fantastic, like, why aren't we doing that more often, honey? But when I was going into my master's and my PhD, I was in my masculine energy so much. And I was reading and studying and writing and doing all the stuff that you have to do when you go through school. Then I had a private practice on top of it. Paul had a restaurant that was a 24-hour almost restaurant that he ran. And so we were exhausted. There was no polarity. I mean, we were like just hanging out. I mean, honestly, we probably had sex twice a month, maybe back then, which is the average. The average couple has sex twice a month, 24, 26 times a year, right? That's the national average in the United States anyway. I don't know about France and Spain and all those crazy countries, but I remember, I don't know if I shared this with you, but I remember sitting in the jacuzzi with my husband one night and I said, babe, how often do you think we're having sex a year? And he's like, I don't know, 100? And I'm like, I don't think so, sweetheart. And, we kind of just looked at each other and like, well, we got to up the ante. And so we decided to have sex and make love to each other for 90 days and every day. We didn't get to every day, but we got to almost every day. And I recognized as I was like really standing in that energy, because we were doing it as an experiment, I noticed how I was talking myself out of my own sexuality. I was talking myself out of my pleasure. I was talking myself out of my own pleasure ceiling. And I was just really realizing how much out of flow I actually was with myself. And so that is something you have to look into if you want to be in a sacred partnership. So anyways, the long story short of that is that, we use sex now in sexuality and making love as a way to find flow in our everyday lives, and we start, sometimes we start in the morning, sometimes we end in the evening with each other, but we make love anywhere between 4, sometimes 6, sometimes, almost every day. It just depends on the week and how much we have going on, but we make it a priority. And it's almost like, it's like a non-negotiable, because we realize how much spending that quality time with each other and connecting in that way allows us to just like vibrate through our whole day. Like in my flow state, in my work state, all the other things, like especially if I'm working with couples, I'm so much more tuned in even. And that's become an important part of our polarity and our energy when you make it part of your everyday flow. You can do that, but you also have to just make sure, that when you're working, you come out of work, that you really step in to the energy of the polarity, because if you don't, then it doesn't really happen as much. And so then it goes back to that nuanced conversation. What's your routines like? How are you making quality time during the day? How many times are you making connection with your partner? Are you kissing a couple of times throughout the day in the work day? Are you hugging each other? Are you touching each other? Are you coming to your partner and just kind of laying into him, throughout the day and allowing yourself to just be in his energy? And really, it's a reverence. It's like, it's love. Really, polarity is like the epitome of true love. It's like symbiosis just coming together. That's what it is. And it's a real balance, I find. And sometimes you're going to get out of balance too. I just wanted to say, like, for those that are listening, you're going to find yourself out of balance a lot. You know what I'm saying? It's a daily attunement, and also talking about sex too. Like Paul and I were always talking about it, he's like, hey honey, how about later? I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. And then later happens and I'm like, hey, how about 20 minutes from now? And, we're always talking about it. We're flirting with each other. We're creating that moment that's going to happen later or tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And we're honest with each other. If you're tired and you just don't have the energy in you, don't say no to your partner. Say, not right now. How about tomorrow morning? And make a commitment to your partner, that we're going to make love. we're just not going to make love right now. We're going to make love later. One of the things that I say to Paul all the time is like, I'm not ready yet, honey, but I'm getting ready for you, and Paul always loves that, because it's a way to not reject your partner, but let them know that I'm still interested. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. That's been a big one in our relationship, and like, especially the last year growing my business to the way it is. I've been so in my masculine energy, and I've only just shifted back now to my feminine, and I'm not taking on as many one-on-one clients because I'm doing this podcast and launching a course and other things going on. So it's been really nourishing to actually have a little bit, create space for intimacy. And we're a big thing in about like in the moment, and really allowing time for it to unfold in the moment, because I've in my relationship, I've said like I've been a bit into like using sex as manipulation and control to get what I want, and he's noticed that, and that's always put him off wanting to give me that, because he knows I'm doing it not from a place of love but from a place of lack, and needing that male masculine energy for validation, and not doing it because I'm in love in the moment, doing it from a place of neediness. So that's something we've been working on, and it's definitely helped our sexual energy and our intimacy. And since we've coming back together, we've had loads more sex. It's been a lot more nourishing, and I think the biggest thing for us has really been about the journey and not the finale, and really enjoying the process. Whereas before, because we weren't having sex as much as I would liked and he would have liked, we would be just kind of wanting to go to the end, and then it would take away the exploration of the the intimacy aspect of just getting to know each other's bodies again, and all of the foreplay that comes with that. And I think now it's really about that journey process, and whether we orgasm or not, it's really about the journey. And and I think we've had more we've had more joint orgasms this time around than ever before, because we're really in sync, in symbiosis with each other's breath, each other's energy, and it just feels so nourishing. So it definitely, once we
that's awesome
come into the polarity of, I can step in more into my feminine, he can be more in his masculine, because he doesn't feel like he's being controlled by my feminine energy, wounded energy. It really, I can see the shift in our dynamic. So I think what you're saying is super correct there, and it's only when you start to notice it in your own life you can have that like aha moment, like, oh, I get it now. I have to really embody my own polarity and my own sexual energy, and even if they're not in the mood for sexual intimacy, like, why can't I give it to myself? Why do we always put it on the partner to? And that's what I noticed when I was on my own. Like, I can give myself orgasms if I want to, and I think we often always think our partner has to give it to us, but sometimes it's good to channel that energy within, and then it will come out in the relationship, radiate out in the relationship.
Yeah, I think something that you brought up is actually really important, which is control. And control is something that I think a lot of women have learned to rely on, because we've learned that we're unsafe, and if we can control the narrative of sex, then we can create a relationship of certainty, and we can create a relationship of safety for ourselves, which is not trusting the masculine. And if you can't trust the masculine, then there's no way to find that dance that you were just talking about that you guys are now finding. And I had to find the same dance. Control for me was something that was like literally my middle name. It was definitely something that I had to recognize within myself, but it wasn't until I was married and in a sacred relationship, meaning a committed relationship, that I actually allowed myself to go there. And I allowed myself to recognize that control in the bedroom. And first of all, it didn't turn me on. I mean, I don't think Paul really noticed, but for me, the polarity of it, when it starts to come into your awareness, you really can't surrender in the way. And I've never really had trouble with orgasm or anything like that, but many women can experience orgasm when they're in that controlled state, because their body is so tight and their pelvic floor is so tight, so there's a lot of elements to sexuality and sacred sexuality. And And also, in addition to this conversation, like I said, it can go on for hours, but communication, if you can't have vulnerability and communication, and we can probably tie it up with this today, if we can't have vulnerability, we can have sacred sexuality. And what you were talking about, whatever we do in our normal lives is an exact replica in our sex lives. If we control in our regular lives, we're controlling in the bedroom. So if you think, oh, I don't have any problems with sex and, life is good, but all you do in your life is control and micromanage, you got problems, you got problems in the bedroom. And it's just pay attention, because your personal life is a mirror to your sex life. And I always pay attention to the kind of sex I'm having, because I'm like, damn, that was so good. And I'm like, okay, what am I doing in my regular life that's showing up so good, And it's actually a really good indication of where your mind is at, So some cool tips for everyone today, right? I think it was a good conversation. What do you think?
It was amazing. Thank you so much. And I literally have learned so much. I'm like writing it down. And I think the topic is definitely, if we can't have vulnerability, we can't have sacred sexuality. And amen to that. And thank you so much for, being on this podcast. I know it's really late for you. You're in Miami, is it? Miami?
Yeah, Florida.
Mm-hmm. Florida, yeah. And yeah, like I said, this topic, I think people are so desperate to learn more about. And, I'd love to, we'll have you on the podcast, I'm sure, in the next, the next couple of episodes. And I know that tell me about what you're launching, because you've got some cool, exciting things. Like, how can people reach you and learn more about you? I know you have your own podcast coming up soon. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Bree. Yeah, so we just closed our Taboo Talk Time podcast, and we are opening the Sacred Partners podcast in October. And I have the most amazing guests that are coming on. And of course, I'd love to have you on, Bree, as well. And, we're just really excited to be able to launch this, because the podcast is going to be kind of like sitting around a fire. And, like back in the day, the tribes and the communities, we were all sit around the fire, because the TV has replaced the fireside chats. And for me, I think it's so important, especially with all this digital, era and Facebook and YouTube and all this stuff, for us to kind of bring back the fireside chat where we talk about stories. And so I'm going to be talking about different stories and different narratives that my couples go through, which I think is going to be really relatable to people that are going to be listening to the podcast, because it's not just about here's the solutions. It's a story, and inside the story, you get all these good little things, that makes you think like, hey, I really need to take a look at that part of myself a little bit more. And a big part of the podcast, in addition to bringing the fireside community back into Sacred Partnership, is my husband and I. And we've never done a podcast together, but we're so excited about it. Paul's completely petrified, because he's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be on a podcast? I've never done this before. So he's going through, his moments of insecurity and growth and learning how to communicate, because I've been on videos and podcasts and doing that stuff for years. But when we decided to do the podcast together, he's like, I think I'm ready to do this, honey. And I'm like, okay. And the thing is that my husband has so much good information. He's so brilliant, and he's such an embodiment of the divine masculine, that I'm always like, babe, you went from type A alpha from West Virginia with the biggest ego and chip on your shoulder to this divine masculine sacred sexuality dude that has conscious communication. You know what I mean? You have something to share, sweetheart. Just because you don't do this for a living like I do, it doesn't mean you don't have anything to share. And I think the men and the women are really going to relate to my husband, because he doesn't come from the same academic background as I do, which I think just makes him so easy to listen to and relatable. So we're going to talk about our own story. The very first podcast is going to be about our relationship. We're going to get into it. And it's funny, because every time Paul and I get into a conversation, it's almost like being in our living room with us. And we just really go there. You know what I mean? And I just think people and the couples are just going to get so much out of the realness and the authenticity of the content, because I think there's just so much foo-foo content out there that doesn't really give couples the grounding that they really, really are looking for and desiring. So that's what we're hoping the podcast is going to be about. Yeah.
Hoping it will definitely be. I can't wait to listen.
Yeah.
And it's funny because my partner Jordan and I, we're gonna do a podcast in the next couple of days, and
Cool.
I'm kind of like, damn it, I wish I could listen to yours first, because I think it would give me so much inspiration. And
yeah,
really what the podcast and your podcast and the work that we do is through our own fuck ups, through our own bullshit, helping people, jump back to a state of love, joy, gratitude, inspiration at any given moment. So I would love to, how can these people get hold of you if they want to learn more, if they want to book a session, or, they want to dive deeper into this topic with you personally? How can they touch base with you?
Yeah. Okay. So if you want, you guys can go to relationshiprevolutionaries.com. We're actually putting Sacred Life Partners, the new website. We're redirecting it this week. It's going to be sacredlifepartners.com. So you guys can go there. We just did a complete rebrand, and we're actually going to be rolling out a membership program for couples, and we're going to be charging anywhere between $99 to $150 a month. We're not sure what we're going to charge, probably around $99 a month. And we're going to be doing 2 live events a month that are basically like experiential couples retreats for couples to come on live and to learn like something new that they can apply to their relationship every month. And then of course a bunch of goodies and bonuses and things like that, where they get to do some question and answer and ask about questions in their relationship. And I've always wanted to do a membership program like this because, not everyone needs to do like super integrated work with a therapist. Sometimes couples are just looking for a maintenance program. Like, hey, how can we bring spice into our relationship every month? And how can we keep it going and keep it fun? And that's what the membership idea is about. And I'm thrilled to offer that. And I think it's going to be hot. I think people are just going to be so stoked about it, because I would sign up for it for sure. Like,
I want to sign up.
There was a membership program out there. Yeah. And, it's like, to see me privately, it's like $350 for 90 minutes, right? And for $99 a month, you get these awesome live events and all this stuff, and you don't have to spend that amount of money if you're not doing like deep integrative work. Not saying that you shouldn't. You should do some work, but in addition to that, you can do these fun things to like add spice to the relationship. I mean, Paul and I are always doing something fun. Like, we just signed up to a dance class online, and we're learning how to dance salsa. I have a tantra sex course that I'm taking right now with him. Like, we're always doing something. Like, even though I teach it and stuff like that, we're always doing something in our own lives. And I think couples are looking for this. So we're going to do that. And of course, we have our 90-day renew and restore program and stuff. And you guys can find us on Instagram at Sacred Partners, sacredlifepartners.com. And thank you so much, Bree, for having me on today.
I'm so excited. I'm definitely signing up for your course. And the mentorship, membership sounds amazing. And I think a lot of people can jump on and check you out on Instagram. Yeah. And obviously, when your podcast is launched, they can go and find you and listen to you and Paul. And I can't wait to hear that, see that unfold. And thank you so much. I absolutely, I feel so in my element when I'm talking to you. I feel so calm, so grounded, and we just bounce off each other. And I love this relationship that we're growing. And I can't wait to get you over to Bali, and we could do a couples retreat, like a holistic Ayurvedic kind of detoxed retreat.
I would love that. That'd be amazing. Yeah.
Well, hopefully next year, when all this COVID is over, and we can jump back to normal. And yeah,
please, let's do it.
Sending you lots of love. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sweetheart. Have a wonderful day, guys. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for joining me, your host, By Roots, on the Dharma Journey podcast. It's been an honor to guide you and to have you listen to me and amazing people on this podcast from all walks of life. If you enjoyed the podcast, if something shifted within you and hopefully it made you laugh, cry, or had a moment of inspiration, then please feel free to share this podcast with others if it resonates. And really, that's how we grow. We grow as a collective. We grow when we unite and we help one another out.
And really, that's the beauty of why we're all here, is to guide each other home, help us uncover our unique soul's jiva, our purpose, so we can shine a light with others and live a more auspicious life. So thank you for joining me on the Dharma Journey, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Aho, Harry on.